Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Tom Schreier, and I have the great privilege of being the founding director with my partner, Chris Stevens, as co-founding director of the Inspired Leadership Initiative here at the University of Notre Dame. And for the benefit of those of you that will have the opportunity to watch us on ThinkND, our online learning platform, the Inspired Leadership Initiative is the place here at the University of Notre Dame where people can come back and discover, discern, and design the next stage of their lives. And as I mentioned, it's really been a great privilege to be a part of this from the very beginning. And I just want to welcome you to the second installment of the Inspiring Conversation series. The Inspiring Conversation series is something that we came up with during the pandemic to keep a connection with our audience. And for the past couple of years, what we've wanted to do is bring people that can help to advance the idea of leadership in public conversation, something which is incredibly important. I know many of you were here yesterday when we had an opportunity to meet with Ann Thompson from NBC, who is another person who's a very powerful and great leader in public conversation. And I especially want to thank those people at ThinkND, the people in the Alumni Association who came up with the idea of this online learning platform, which allows the wisdom of this great institution to be broadcast out to people who are Notre Dame alumni, Notre Dame students, and very importantly, friends of Notre Dame, and just really want to know and understand the best of what Notre Dame has to offer. And it's been a really powerful tool for us to bring topics that we believe are very important to the public dialogue to them. And I also want to thank our partners here at the Institute for Educational Initiatives and the leadership there, who's graciously allowed us to use this beautiful space here, in particular Matt Closer and Chrissy Trinter, who were super gracious. And of course, I don't think it hurt that Father Kevin is a member of that community and helped to foster that relationship. So thank you. So let me just introduce you briefly and we'll get started with our conversation.
Don't read all that, though.
I'm not going to read all that. These are, okay. I'm not. I promised you I promised you I wouldn't. It's more of a prompt for me. I didn't read all this either. I have wonderful people that write it and then I get to pick what to say. And it really works nice. But I've had the great pleasure over the course of the past month or so to get to know Dan a bit. And Dan Porterfield is the author of this book right here, It Matters, the Role of Higher Education in Fostering Growth Mindsets Across Generations. All of you are alumni of the Inspired Leadership Initiative, and just about every word in that title means something to you, or we hope it does, because if it doesn't, we failed in our mission. So we couldn't really think of anybody better. And just a couple of highlights. He's the CEO and president of the Aspen Institute. I think a lot of you are familiar with that institute, and it's an institute that I think has a lot of, and as I've come to better understand it, I think a lot of very mission-aligned things with what we do, and that's really powerful. Before that, he was president of Franklin and Marshall College, and I think the thing that he did there most powerfully, which resonates a lot, I think, at an institution, as we heard yesterday from the leaders of Ann Bryce and Transformational Leaders, it's an institution that dramatically expanded the access for under-resourced and first-generation students in a really meaningful and intentional way when you were president, and that was super powerful. And before that, and I can tell you from the faculty that I've been in touch with that about Dan's visit, he was the head of strategic development at Georgetown University, a role where he had a really transformative influence there. So I could say a lot more, but he told me not to. I do what I'm told. I will just say beforehand, having had the opportunity to read his book, I strongly recommended doing that. And it's right here afterwards, and you can get it. But with that, I'll just start off our discussion. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Bo.
I just thought just to give a little bit of insight into you. A lot of the people in our audience here are thinking about what's next. You've had a pretty eclectic career path, right? That's covered a lot of ground, and I think that's instructive to our audience. So maybe just talk a little bit about that and how you've made the decisions along the way to take the vocations that you've chosen.
Oh, well, thank you. It's great to be here, and this is such an important program, a national model, although ironically, no one can quite do it the way you do it. So everybody else that builds these kinds of programs will be looking here. There's such a need. I grew up in Baltimore City during the era of the Civil Rights Movement, and I was very fortunate that my parents were very distinctive human beings. My mom had grown up in foster care. She was then reunited with her birth mother and then thrown out of the house by her birth mother because she and her then husband didn't want her dating my dad. And so that led to me. They got married. And so my grandmother was in the circus and her husband was a magician in the circus. And the magic was that bad relationship gave me and my sister the chance to be alive. My dad was a playwright who's Jesuit educated, He was angry at racism, at the Vietnam War. It was a generation that was deeply suspicious of authority. He became a local playwright in Baltimore, in his theater called Corner Theater, which I only went to a couple times because I was little, um, was the site of these incredibly intense productions about the dilemmas of the time. And ultimately, they divorced. We grew up in a neighborhood where we were the only white family. We then moved into a neighborhood where there were no black families, all white neighborhood, only 6 blocks apart. And then we saw that neighborhood become integrated, which there was all kinds of social strife for a little while. And then it became a really great neighborhood. My mom stayed in that neighborhood and told me when we first saw some of the violence being done to the black families that moved in and the intimidation, she said, she went out and brought casseroles and things and was like a normal neighbor. And she just said, you're going to have to decide as you grow up what kind of white person you're going to be. She went to college at night and at Towson in her 30s as a single mom. She went back to school and ultimately became a very eminent historian of women in the American West. First, she got her BA, then she got her master's, then she got her PhD in her 40s. Her first book was on the history of women who were sex workers in the American West. They basically went out to look for gold, and the next group behind the gold diggers were the sex workers. And she was able to document what their lives were like. It was archival. She'd drive all around the West, go to little halls of records, figure out who got arrested, what they got arrested for, try to find family members that would still be descendants 80 years later. And it was a really great book. Wasn't considered history by many at that time. And so the only place she could teach, the only place that would hire her, she's also mid-40s or something, it was Gallaudet. So she had to learn sign language for a year to go teach. But then she wrote a few more books and then ultimately became the head of the editor of the Journal of Western History based at Utah State. So I say all that to say that having a front row seat of civil strife that resolved in a way that was very positive, and at the same time also having a mom who showed through her example that education was the way forward in order to build a fulfilling life. I certainly didn't have any choice but to decide that what I wanted to do in my life was just help people. And so I've had different jobs, but it just comes down to that. There's nothing profound about it. And that I find that enjoyable. And so we've done lots of different ways of doing that. And I like moving among sectors and being in higher ed and being nonprofit world and some time in government. What I most like, though, is activating with others the talents of younger people and helping young people grow into their capability and being a person who's available and a resource for younger people as they make their way.
This wasn't in the script, but you told a great story today at breakfast, which tells me that you were as powerful of a parent you are as powerful of a parent to your children as your parents were to you when you first embarked in your presidency at Franklin Marshall, and your daughter accompanied you to a faculty meeting. So maybe just share that briefly, because I think it shows, and I think it's really important also because it's this idea of education not just being within the walls of the institution.
So the greatest gift in my life after my family, my parents, my children, my wife, Karen, was my undergraduate education at Georgetown University. It continues to be a deep part of how I see the world and how I learn and adapt. And so when I was in my 30s, after having worked for a few years for then HHS Secretary Donna Shalala, I had the chance to go back to my alma mater and in a blended role of faculty member and head of strategy and city and federal relations. And so I taught, and I also worked at the level of the senior administration, and then we moved on campus. I just wanted more. So my wife and I were the crazy ones, if you think of it this way, who were in their 40s with 3 children under 6. We lived in a dorm for 8 years, in the dorm, taking over the washing machines on Sundays and with 6 loads of pink laundry. And knocking on the door, do you have a key to my room? No, I don't. It's not my role. But we loved it. We were at the center of the institution. We were like the family. And it's how important it is for younger people in settings that are heavy peer settings to have access to adults as examples and role models and mentors and all. You're just so powerful. It's amazing how valuable our dog was to the education of Georgetown undergraduates. Like they said, they got a dog. Like, yeah, we have a dog. And we had 1,000 babysitters. And it was great because when our kids first asked if they could be on Facebook, we delayed it. And then At that time, Facebook was a little more popular. And then when they finally joined, they had 200 of my students became their first friends. So I had spies watching everything. Anyway, we had this great experience where our kids ruled the roost. They ran the campus for 8 years and all 365 days a year. And our oldest, Lizzie, really didn't like the idea of moving to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and leaving that life. None of our kids really wanted to, but it turned out that parents' votes are double, so we won 4-3. so it was a journey to get Lizzie on board with this. She only wanted to be for the rest of her life at Georgetown. And it was at Franklin and Marshall I met Allie Morey, John's daughter, and I'll talk about her learning in a moment. So I said, Lizzie, you got to give it a shot. Why don't you come with me? I'm going to be interviewed to be on the faculty. I'd already been picked as president, and she'd already decided that she had her thoughts about Franklin and Marshall College. Come with me. Lizzie had gone and been in my classes at Georgetown. We did a lot of community-based learning, and we did trips, places, and she'd come along. We don't make our children do things. Our other two weren't as interested, but Lizzie was, so she did it. So I said, come on with me. So to be on the faculty as the president, you still have to be interviewed by the faculty. You have to give a sort of a talk about your ideas. You got to give them your syllabi, and you have to teach a class. So it's a full day, and then there's like a dinner afterwards. And so Lizzie comes along. The class is taught well, and then the interview part. Now we're in a room, and there's 15 English department professors, and in a circle, and Lizzie's right here. And they asked me to explain a little bit of my teaching. I do, and then the first professor says, very eminent, all this stuff where the students are like working in the prisons, or they're working in the homes of the immigrants, or they're working in the public schools. We don't do that here. I'm like, okay, it's okay. Nobody has to do everything. We don't do that here. Like, this is English. Well, we look at great texts. I don't get it. So I explain it the way any of you would. And it's good. I hear Lizzie breathing next to me. Then the second hand goes up, different question. She says, yes, I want to go back to this social work. You're teaching social work. But we do literature. So again, I get it. We need people to do what they do. It's not a winner-take-all thing. So I explain again how rigorous it is, the way the literary text that you read about the child's immigrant experience when you're tutoring a child helps you understand the child, and the child's experience helps you understand the literature. And I have a whole spiel, and she just shakes her head. So then a third hand goes up, and it's Lizzie. And Lizzie does remind me a lot of Allie. They look alike. They remind me of each other a lot. And I was like, Lizzie, you have a question. She says, I don't understand why you're asking those questions. Don't you get it? That students want to go do things and integrate what they do with what they're reading? And I've gone with them like to New York, and the students stayed overnight in the homes of these Christa Ray students and talked to their parents about college, and they went in these schools. What possible reason could you have to not be supportive of that? I just don't understand. And there's like dead silence. They're all terrified. And I ultimately, the only person that can answer the question is me, because they won't talk. So I was like, Lizzie, we're in the academy. We share methodologies. It's all about the idea that we can learn together, and a little friction's good for figuring out what you really think. She like shakes her head like you've all seen your children do. Walks over to get a cup of water. There's dead silence, takes a sip, leaves the room, swings behind. And I couldn't have had a better introduction to the Franklin and Marshall College faculty. Right. It just totally broke the ice. Yeah. And it was great. It was so great. Yeah. And in time, Lizzie actually came to think it was a good idea that we didn't literally spend every moment of our lives on one place for all time. So thank you for asking.
Yeah. But I think what just came through that, and what I've come to understand, is you're a great storyteller, and that's really what your book is. It's a series of great stories, right, about why mindset matters. And so maybe just talk a little bit about that, and maybe pick a story or a subset, just to take our audience here through why mindset matters and how those stories help to inform that.
I wanted to write a book that would, among other things, explicate the most powerful learning experience that I've been exposed to as a witness and a participant. And there's so much talk in America today about why college is bad. It costs too much. That's one important topic. Others will say It just reinforces the existing inequalities. It's a hierarchy fortification system. Others will say the exact opposite. Oh, no, it's a woke factory. You go there, you get brainwashed about the revolution. And then others will say, oh, actually, they're just paying for the party. It's just delayed adulthood. And those four big critiques are worthy of being engaged, but they are not the whole story. And I know that because I lived in a dorm for 8 years, because I was president of a school with full of engaged students. I handed out degrees for 20 years, saw students walk across into their future with a belief that they had what it takes to really create a great life for themselves and make a difference. And most of these narratives that are attacks, most of them are from people that like looking to attack things. But who wants to build things? So yes, there's things to improve. So who wants to improve? Are we really just going to say, yeah, we don't need college anymore? Do we want to have people who are doctors? Do we want to have people who have MBAs? Do we want to have people who are diplomats? Do you think it's good that we can engage the world through our higher education system and bring people to America to experience college in such a way that they come back home and say, I like that tradition, and more? So I wanted to write a book that was both an explication of learning driven by students, supported by faculty and other educators that I really admired. And then secondly, that made a case for higher education in a way that you could not finally just say, that guy's full of BS, because these are real human beings. 35 stories I tell in this book, real people who came to college with a yearning to grow and developed in their college experience a mindset that they are a learner and a grower. It plays out in different ways. For some, it's this mindset that I am a discoverer. I can ask questions no one's ever thought to ask in order to find answers no one's thought to look for. And for others, it's about, and these overlap, of course, it's about creating. I want to make something. I want to put my tattoo on the land of this university. Maybe it's a club. Maybe it's a new business. Maybe it's a work of art. But I want to make things. And then for another group, again, it overlaps. It's about mentorship. Everybody's getting mentored throughout their college experience. It starts with so much passing down of information, soft and informally, through peers. Others lean into that and say, this is what I want to do, is give and grow by giving back. There's so many opportunities for mentorship, important form of leadership. In another sense, it's about teamwork. These are your children, if they're still in college, there's teams of teams. They're on teams all day long. Different classes are teams, different clubs and organizations are teams, jobs on campus are teams, residence communities are teams. It's a constant team experience, but your role is changing all the time. And then there's one other one, which I could have written about in more explicitly religious and spiritual terms, but I wanted to save that for another way of writing, about the discernment of your deepest values and how your growth can be powered by what you value. And I call that striving, when you constantly are growing into and because of the values you hold. So those mindsets, I know many students are able to activate them during their college years. I'm positive of it. I've seen it across hundreds, if not thousands, of students I knew personally. I wanted to organize a book that would present that. And I think those particular mindsets are extra valuable in this time, today, now, because we live in an era where the rate of change is escalating so fast across every field, across how we get information, good and bad, across demographically, in terms of even like the world order. There's so much change, faster change. And what is it that makes people feel disabled and unhappy is when change is happening to them and they're not able to adapt to it or even drive it themselves. And with a growth mindset, you approach the new, the challenging, the disruptive with a sense, I am a grower. My capabilities aren't fixed. I can lead my learning. I'm the one that can adapt and drive change. And that mindset is even more valuable in this world than it was when we all went to college. So that's what I wanted to capture that in stories. One story, and I could tell many, one story is John's daughter, Allie, who I met when she was in her sophomore year, and she joined a club called Point oh 08. And Point oh 08 is a group that wanted to promote safer socializing. The idea is that Point oh 08 is the legal definition of drunkenness in Pennsylvania. and they wanted to pick that name in order to send a message. Maybe you don't need to get to point oh 0.08, stop at point oh 0.08. Now, some would say, the president of the institution, you better be careful talking about students drinking. Do you even want to get into that? Absolutely. If they want to get into it, I want to get into it. If somebody's actually coming up and saying, let's figure out how to make socializing safer, that's an act of peer leadership par excellence. Like with peers trying to say, let's do this the fun and safe way. Why wouldn't we want to be a part of that? And so, and I didn't invent the club. Students invented the club, and others at F&M had known it was worth having. So I met Allie in the campus coffee shop. I could remember it like it was yesterday, this group of 8 or 9. And my goal was to help them form an agenda so they could feel they were doing something and they were making progress. And so just listening, we ended up, that was the first meeting. And then I learned that Allie was a student athlete and was a serious student with a lot of interest in education. She'd actually taken classes at a nearby university because F&M didn't offer classes. So I was like, well, okay, there's a striver. What does she value? She values community. She values safety and friendship. She values learning. She values education. She's commuting 20 minutes away to go to class. And she's on a team. So she's a field hockey goalie. So there's a lot of great values in there. And as with hundreds of others, I just have a fish tank in my head, and there was a fish named Allie floating around in there. That might be like a fish named Allie. I think that's like a book.
It's a book.
So Allie comes to me at the end of sophomore year and says, I think I have some opportunities. I want to ask you, how would you think about them? There's a group that has a sorority, and I have a chance, if I want to run, to lead the sorority. And in point oh 0.08, there's a leader of point oh 0.08, and I've been heavily involved, and I could do that too. And what do you think about that? And so we had good conversations about leadership and taking it on. What does it mean? And peer responsibility and leading isn't as easy as being a part of the team. And she ran for both and won them both. And then at home over the summer, thought through, how am I going to be on the field hockey team? Which was a big deal. She was recruited. She was not yet a starter. And how am I going to be on that team and lead point oh 0.08 and lead a sorority and go to school? And I had very similar experience in college, the way I approached college, where you just finally have to choose among good things. And Allie's a striver, and she's striving towards her values. She wants to live her values. So she has to make this tough choice to say no to something. And he's like, is this important? This is defining. This isn't just important. These moments are absolutely central to the formation of adult sensibility. And so she made this agonizing choice, I'm sure you talked about it with her, to go to the coach that recruited her and say, and F&M field hockey is really good, tournament every year. I think I need to develop myself. I need to go where my values are telling me my growth needs to come. And so she stepped out of field hockey, which meant stepping out of a peer group, even though they're all friends still. It's one thing to be friends, another thing to be 8 hours a day around each other, especially in season, and relying on each other. Goalie especially, because the goalie can't win the game alone. It's impossible. They can lose the game, but they can't win the game. So that junior year, I was present and a couple times went out with her bringing pizza to fraternities and sororities. I'd go watch it. What were they doing to try to, in the real world, to make it a little less likely that students would binge or would make bad decisions with the only lives they have? There's all kinds of ways they did it, but I watched a lot of it and just observed it and wanted to be supportive. And it didn't bother me to be the president showing up at a fraternity party. Didn't bother me at all. I'd rather be outside. I didn't normally go in, except maybe with Allie with the pizza, but I would be out in the outside of it with the line. They want them seeing. The people that work here that are the adults, so to speak, we really care what's happening. We all have the ability to send those kind of messages. So anyway, so she has a great junior year. And then home, probably again talking with you and your wife, thinks deep inside, going as close as she can to what she values as a 21-year-old. She said, I really miss my sisters on that field hockey team. Humbles herself to go back to the coach and say, her name is Missy Mariano, Missy, can I come back? And a lot of coaches and a lot of programs would have said, forget it, come on. But Missy said, you got to earn your spot. And so then she competed all in the summer, prepared herself, competed, won that spot back, had to then step back from sorority in .08. That's hard too. And then had such a meaningful senior season. They won a lot of matches. She was a really good goalie. This point, though, this journey of striving, of trying to align our values with our choices so that we can grow towards where we are called, is actually phenomenally important at the moments of emerging adulthood, of youth and emerging adulthood. Phenomenally important to have the experience of confronting the choice between multiple good goals that you value and having to make the definitional choice, but then to have to make it again. And so I really admired that. I wanted to have a way to tell stories like that. Now, you raised her. All I did was watch her. But it was such a great thing to see. And of course, Allie Morey is thriving today as a teacher who's orienting herself towards school leadership. Not surprising. She'll probably be the Secretary of Education in 30 years. So those kinds of stories, if people say, I don't want to read those kind of stories, okay, fine, then don't read them. You can stick with the econometrics, and you can have lots of good arguments for college that way. But I do feel that there's something quite eminent in what we're all trying to accomplish. And for all the challenges of higher education, if we miss the people, if we forget it's about individual people, that education's about people, what we're really doing is missing the chance to create something with young people that will then make our society so much stronger.
So just listening to you and the words you use and the way you frame things and everything else, there are parallels, as we've talked about, between what we do and what you do at Aspen Institute. Maybe just a little bit, just from what we've talked about and your familiarity with other programs in our space, a little bit about the work you do at Aspen Institute, how you've animated those values there, and how you can see that potentially in the context of what we're doing here.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. So I think probably like many of you in different times, I didn't want to leave Georgetown University. I had no desire to leave. I loved our life, what we were doing, and my wife and I together, we loved it. And sometimes you face an inflection point. You wonder, is there another way to learn, another way to give, another way to grow? And so for me, that way was to take the responsibility, if I could get it, if someone would entrust it to me, to lead a full institution as opposed to being a partner with the president and other leaders to lead Georgetown. And that was a wonderful opportunity and a moment of loss, leaving behind something that you love because you want to try something that you think you could love. And that's really what it is. Aspiration is about often taking the step into an unknown. And that step is almost like a moment of conviction that there's something else out there. It was really hard to leave Georgetown because of how we had built our lives there. And it's exactly the same at Franklin and Marshall. I had no interest in leaving Franklin and Marshall College. I loved it. And when the Walter Isaacson stepped down or announced he was leaving as president of the Aspen Institute, without going into the details of it all, the search committee reached out and said, we know a little bit about you. Would you consider being a candidate? And so again, it was like, do I want to try to give and grow in a different way? I've been at Franklin and Marshall about 8 years. So it was an appropriate time. So I ended up competing to be selected as CEO. And what is the Aspen Institute? It's a global nonprofit organization. It's pretty large. We have budget-wise, about $270 million budget, roughly 60 programs. What is our purpose? Well, we exist to ignite human potential, to build understanding, and from there to promote new possibilities for a better world. That covers a lot. There's a lot of need for understanding. There's a lot of need for new possibilities. We're not a think tank. We're much more of a collaboration tank, of an action tank. A number of our programs are leadership development. People typically ages 35 to 45 at an inflection point where they've climbed one or two mountains already. Before they climb the next one, they want to commit to going deep into what their own values are and to being able to move forward to try to align even more firmly their actions and their values, which I think is one definition of integrity. We believe things and we act consistent with what we believe. So we have about 5,000 people that have done those leadership programs, and some in different ways. Some of them are well-known, major corporate leaders. Mayor Pete is an alum of one of our leadership programs. In fact, 7 who ran for president with him have done one program or the other. We were nervous when Kamala Harris was going to pick her VP that she'd pick an Aspen Fellow because she's an Aspen Fellow, and she was considering 3 Aspen Fellows, but she didn't. So that's good. And then we have about 25 programs that work on collective impact, on improving community colleges, on making the economy more inclusive, on addressing cyber culture and all the things that are toxic about it, on practical problem solving around carbon reduction and dealing with the need for both energy and in the world and also an environment that's not degraded. And then we have 13 global Aspens, as I said, and we have a seminar program that brings adults together for a week-long seminar, a version of what you're doing, although not as intense as what you're doing, or not as prolonged. And then we have a lot of youth programs. Mike and Jackie Bezos, the parents of Jeff Bezos, just made a donation of $185 million to the Institute for us to create a center on rising generations whose vision is that we will make civil dialogue, civic participation, and leadership development a predictable part of growing up in America for all young people, obviously in partnership with everybody who wants to partner. So it's an organization with a lot of capacity. It's fundamentally nonpartisan, obviously, but it's also deeply connected to the business community. And our founders in the post-war moment of sort of civilization, of rallying behind civilization in the aftermath of the Holocaust and the beginnings of nuclear arms race, beginning of the Soviet system, the beginning of communism in China, our founders believed that the private sector should be a part of civil society, intrinsically related to the work that we all should do together to protect and build a good society.
Yeah, and I think, as we've discussed, a lot of these are the similar sorts of animating principles behind what we do in programs like ours, and I just found the parallels to be fascinating.
Yeah, I think what you're pioneering is both exemplary, because only Notre Dame would do it the way you're doing it.
Right.
These ideas of discovery, discernment, design, and then it's also potentially exemplary, i.e. others could do it too. And so I hope that's what happens.
Yeah. And I think the wonderful thing is to see organizations like yours that work with similar sort of individuals and can potentially be complementary in many wonderful and beautiful ways.
One thing I would want to mention is, so there's a lot of ways to be a societal leader, many ways. We do a lot of thinking about what is leadership as you're doing. I love that you're here. And something that I've done a lot of is serve on nonprofit boards. I really recommend that as something to think about in your local community, or if there's one that cuts across communities that really speaks to you. It's a great way to both share your experience and support a management team and also protect and develop something valuable. I'm on the board of Colorado College right now and of Teach for America, the national board of TFA, and those are great boards to be on. And I've been on a number of scholarship boards, foundation boards, Jesuit Refugee Services. And that's just one approach, but I really want to encourage that, because you will immediately, especially with this experience as a part of it all, immediately be a ballast. And today's nonprofit organizations are, on the one hand, have to compete to make a difference. They also have to figure out how to finance themselves, and they have to deal with more risk and complexity than ever before. And so having adults, really mature people with perspective on the boards makes a huge difference.
And how fitting for you as a board member of Teach for America to be sitting in the space where the Alliance for Catholic Education, which is a Catholic version of Teach for America, is housed.
Oh, I know the ACE program well. Yeah. I'll hold back so we can have get more things, but it's a fantastic program. And a number of my Georgetown students taking the classes that I taught then were looking for some way to live in the world like the ideas they've been thinking about and experimenting with through their community service work, and went to the ACE program.
Yeah. So if you're all right with it, because we filter for curiosity in the people that are here, I'd love to give the audience here an opportunity to ask a few questions.
Of course.
Yep. So jump in. Wait for the mic, though, because it's being recorded. So I want to make sure. Luis up front has a question. We have to get a quarterback to toss it for us.
Luis, you're the only person in this room that is wearing swag of another institution.
Yeah. Sorry.
Clearly, you are an individual.
Even the I've been talking to many students here in Mexico as well. I'm leading a refugee shelter. I have a couple of students from higher education coming to the shelter. And I used to talk with them about the kind of world we're living to this generation. I don't feel very proud of it. I think when we talk about migration and refugee issues, wars, diversity, polarization in society, here particularly, and many other parts of the world, the war now strikes in Lebanon. And when you see that world and climate change because of Milton, How do you, being probably this self-criticism about ourselves, do you think we're living this generation? Yesterday we talked about AI
Yeah.
and the impact. What is the most important challenge for this generation in order to really make a difference in a better world?
Yeah. So the biggest challenge is the challenge of the human spirit. We have to support young people who want to opt in and not opt out. And cynicism has yet in the history of humanity to solve a single problem. Like there's no Harvard Business School, you're on our case study on once they got that cynicism going, they really figured out how to solve the problem.
We got it going now. Yep. Not that there wasn't any there.
The biggest crisis, if you will, of our time and probably of most times is the crisis of the human spirit and how to support and animate people who have the potential through giving to grow and through growth to discover still better what their purpose is. So that's point one. The second point is that in engaging young people, it is so valuable to give them the opportunity to learn by doing, but that does absolutely require the presence of caring adults as mentors to help put things in perspective. Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I've enjoyed a lot in inviting students to work in prisons or to work in the homes of recently arrived immigrants or to work with court supervised youth who are at risk of dying the next day, of course, those are heavy topics. Absolutely. You want them to be heavy topics. Absolutely. And the thing you can work with on younger people, maybe every person, is okay to really engage the complexity and difficulty of pain and suffering. You have to be willing to go down. I had a course called Human Rights, A Culture in Crisis, where the students, a pretty big class, all were working, meeting human rights leaders and survivors. You cannot engage with the reality of another person's pain as a caring individual and not go down. The question, though, what resources do you have to come back up so that when you come back up, you can then make the differences that are needed? And so that's our role as educators, is to help students learn what is inside of them and what else they can develop so that they don't have to fear the engagement with pain and difficulty and injustice, but it also is, they can use it and then come back. What brings them back up? For some, it will be their ability to analyze. For some, it'll be their ability to work together. For some, it'll be their understanding of spiritual dimension of life. For some, it may be the feeling of co-creation with those who have suffered, so that suffering can be almost like as an act of witness, a chance to then further build awareness and prevent that from happening again. So that's the key. No cynicism, and partner with young people to help them not fear the engagement with the most difficult realities, but be able to bring themselves back up.
Okay. Go ahead, Sarah.
You missed my swag. I've got some non-indie swag as well. But thank you particularly for your remarks regarding the difficulty of undergraduate looking at friends, looking at studies, looking at extracurricular activities. I remember how difficult that was for all of us. I'd like to ask you a question more about the area of the environment and carbon. That's my area. I joke that I worked for Darth Vader for 20 years and finally figured out a way to work for Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
Many people don't know that the state of California actually has market-based solutions to reduce greenhouse gases. We have a cap and trade in California. Even residents of California don't know that. Secondly, many people don't know that the Nobel Prize was given about 6 years ago to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Yeah.
Both are really important. I'd like to know what the Aspen Institute does to, I don't know, what are you going to do? Tip the balance?
Yep.
Is it research? What are you doing in the area of climate change environment?
Yeah, thank you. I'll be fast so we can follow up. But our methodologies are the dialogue and convening towards a purpose, leadership development, and broadly speaking, enabling solutions. We're not a research organization. We aggregate research. We put researchers in different contexts where they can share information. Sometimes we translate research, but we're not that. So we can partner with anybody. And we have, across our array of work, one program. It's called our Energy and Environment Program that fuses the working with energy companies and energy perspectives with environmental perspectives. And our leader is a young man named Greg Gershuni, who's fabulous. And the key thing is that I think that the environmental questions will require solutions that come from the energy sector. And it's going to require a partnership of all different types. And there's a lot of, like, we've gone from denial to pessimism with no intervening stage of hope on this topic. And so what we try to do is to convene groups off the record to make practical progress on carbon reduction strategies. That always includes the private sector. Without going into the details, we have one on shipping lanes, we have one on ports, especially in LA, we have one on school bus construction, a set of practical projects. But then at the level of convening, a different muscle that we have, we've created something called Aspen Ideas Climate, which now has run 3 years, all in Miami Beach. And Aspen Ideas Climate is a major convening that brings together activists, business, young people, innovators, philanthropists and financial people that are investing in companies, government leaders, people that are doing creative ventures in the media or in public education. The idea of Aspen Ideas Climate, which had about 3,000 people last year at it in Miami Beach, epicenter of climate crisis in a way, and they're not drowning, they're fighting, they're trying to adapt. The idea of Aspen Ideas Climate, any solution should be at Aspen Ideas Climate, and the problem solvers who have a particular lane would benefit from learning what others are doing. If somebody's using 3D printing and somebody else is raising sidewalks and somebody else is doing shade and somebody else is doing research, great. Let's put them all together so that we can ignite this feeling that progress is possible, that people are working. And too often, the people that want to do good have their own solution, and their opponent is the person with the different solution. Like, for goodness sakes, can we please value problem solving? Can we please value leaning in and trying to make a difference? And so what's really interesting about Aspen Ideas Climate is we had a couple panels on nuclear power. You'd think, wouldn't the activist community be dead set against nuclear power? Well, it depends how you curate the conversation and introduce the topic. We had 250, we called them future leaders, most of them activists. We brought them to Aspen Ideas Climate a day and a half early to work with them on why are we doing solutions-based approach? Why are you going to hear solutions you might not agree with? What's the value of your engaging with and learning with people that have got a perspective that's just different than yours? We did not have that problem. We haven't had it yet of finger pointing and outrage and blaming. And we don't want to prioritize one solution. We want to make problem solving what people lean in on. So that's our approach. Others, of course, have their own approaches, and we are not really an activist organization, but we'll bring activists in. But we need to provide I don't want to say impartial as if it's lacking value. We want to provide that large tent through which people can see themselves in relation to one another and can see the problem in its complexity, but also can see that there are really great people working on solutions, even if the assumptions of those solutions are a little bit different sometimes.
Wonderful. Let's put those on over.
Thank you very much for an informative and passionate sharing today with your information and knowledge. And I was reflecting back on what you were sharing about change and the rapidity that occurs and the challenges presented in our world today. I come out of the healthcare environment, and I was reflecting back that the average tenure of a CEO of a healthcare system today is about 3 years.
Exactly.
And so it's
only college presidents or less.
So it's extremely difficult when you think about leadership and over the course of the experience you had from starting out in a young world. And that world is very different that we're in today from the 60s and the 70s. And so as you think back over the course of your career, as well as with the leaders that you're working with today, you mentioned some of the skills that you feel, which is involvement. But I also think that the ability to discern. It's that many times today, it's like an inch wide and a mile wide thinking rather than mile deep in an inch wide thinking. And so to be able to share that with leaders. And so maybe just a note on how you're continuing to listen to leadership and improve leadership in general instead of keeping it at a steady state.
So we did a strategic plan about a year and a half ago. Our board is a very accomplished group. Margot Pritzker is our chair. Margot and her husband, Tom, own Hyatt, and she's extraordinarily thoughtful, incredible partner for me. Our plan, again, just high level here, we created a prism of our priorities. And so we didn't want to say healthcare, artificial intelligence, and war. Those are our priorities. So what we wanted was to be able to apply across. So our priority across all we do. So our priorities are, what more can we do to build social trust across all of our work? What more can we do to elevate, include, animate, empower young people across everything? And the third is leadership. What can we do to be an organization that gathers people and fosters the conversation, whether we do it or others do it, about the importance of values-based and sophisticated leadership, taking the issue seriously? And so those three things we're now applying across everything we do. Now, we were doing those things before, so it's not like it's new, but now it's much more spotlighted. And on the leadership point, there's such a need for this combination of the why of leadership and the how of leadership, the two together. And we've had offerings in both that have been very successful. And we're even more intentionally fusing those two, because what we're thinking is that we have, yes, a lot of programs and they have a lot of leaders, and that's been great. But actually, leadership is a journey. It's a life journey. There's an arc. And so we need to take all of our different offerings and then make them available to people throughout the leadership arc. And that then, there's some days when you're leaning in as a leader, it really is going to be about, one more time here, why as a company do we have to be clear what our values are and then live them? But other times, it's not that. It's actually, can I have the will and the skill to learn stuff I don't know so that I can be relevant, we can be relevant in this world? And it's easy for academics to really privilege the why of it, and especially because business schools don't emphasize it. But the how of it does matter too. Like, we have a program for community college presidents, 20 a year we pick. Those people are the change drivers that are out there, like of all. They're trying to help communities of 15, 20,000 students who are immigrant working class people have a sustainable life in a middle class through education that must be tied to the local economy. It has to be, or it's not going to work. And so for those community college leaders, though they do have the why down, but the how of it can actually be really fostered. We can actually help them be more effective by bringing them together and helping them learn what we've learned from 15 years of doing this with presidents. So that's how we're thinking of it. It's a journey. And for the Institute to be the best people-serving institution we can be, we need to slightly reorganize ourselves and expand our offerings so that you join the Aspen Institute and you never leave. Again, it's like what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I know we're near the.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question, then we'll move on. Okay.
I'm not in a hurry. I'm not in any hurry at all, but I know you have other things to go do.
Pursuant to the topic you were just talking about, do you have any, the number of hats you've worn as a teacher, administrator, academic, what are we going to do for this growing number of young people that can't access the collegiate experience that all of us had?
Yeah.
And is the answer community college? Is the answer something else? And I'm very interested in how do we pragmatic answers to this question.
Yeah. So I think there's multiple options we want to have available, multiple career paths and trajectories. And at the level of the person, the student for a moment, whatever their interests are, good education means they're in a relationship that they can think about what choice they want to make, and it's not made for them by society. They're in a dialogue with a college counselor, a career advisor, a teacher. And so the multiple pathways are there as choices, not as like the lack of choice. And that's actually a real problem in many places where students think they can only do one thing, whatever that one thing is, which includes going right to college. So multiple pathways. I think that there's a lot of excitement in the private sector around apprenticeships and around learning experiences that give students the sort of like the younger people, I should say, new employees, the combination of training and soft skills. There's a program called Year Up that's doing that extremely well that some of you may know. It's national now. I think community colleges are a really important part of the solution, for sure. Learning has to happen across a career. It's not like you get trained and you're done. That's not going to work. And so community colleges may be one of the vehicles to provide ongoing skills-based or knowledge-based upgrades, if you will. And then I think that actually the four-year college space can do a lot better overall at making sure that there's real value in a college experience for life after college. So I don't think there's one answer. I don't think that the country invests in young people as much as we invest in a system that supports older people. And it's good that we support older people. It's one of the things we should be most proud of. But we've got to lean in, I believe, overall more investing, whether it's money for education or opportunities for skills-based learning or invitations to be part of the democratic project. We've got to prioritize young people more. One other thing I'll just say, because I think it ties to how you all think about things. And the conversation with young people should be about who are they and what do they value. That's embedded in your question. But we often forget that. Just tell them what they should be doing and all will be well. And so one of the things I love doing as a teacher, and I'm still doing this with some of our younger employees, is this. When students would come to me a lot because of the relationships we formed when they were competing for something. And I almost viewed teaching as building the relationship so that when they were applying for Teach for America or Deloitte or law school, that they would come to me. Because at that moment, that's actually, you're supposed to want to have impact. So what's impact? Impact is when somebody is vulnerable or in need and they come to you. You have a moment then. That's true also with the trials and tribulations that students feel, but I'll focus on a different place for a moment. So I would say when I had a whole coaching program that I ran out of, including as president of F&M, for helping people prepare to compete for the thing they want to do. But I said, if you're going to take part with me, besides doing the things that we'll do together to help you feel you're going out with your best, where you're prepared, also, you're going to have to do something for me, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. And so we'll come back at the end of this. So if there's, okay, whatever. So we would then, after it, they would have written a resume. We would have gone over it. I don't care what the duties of the job were. What did you get done in the job? Show that. I have my things, I would say, and practice interviews and all that. They come back and say, what's that thing you wanted? You have to do the life resume. What's the life resume? I'll tell you what it is. You can show it to me, but you don't have to. It's one piece of paper. I want it typed. Put your name at the top. This is not your professional resume. We worked on it. It's great. Put your name at the top. Leave a blank space under your name, a good blank space. We'll get to that later. And I want you to address 4 questions. Think of them as headings. So first, in your time in college, or when people are young adults, can you put category 1, when I learned? Just have a couple bullets. I learned this time. I learned that way. I learned from her. And then the second question is, when did I experience joy? I know it's on your resume. When did you experience joy? You don't have to show it to me, but you have to do it. Maybe it was a moment of transcendence that you felt at some moment of insight, a flow state. Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was a new view on yourself. Third one, when did you deal well with difficulty? With difficulty. Was it a breakup? Was it a problem in your family? Was it a moment when you let yourself down? Don't think everybody doesn't have to get through life not dealing with this, and you have. And the fourth one, in the life resume, the category is helping others. When did I help somebody else? Oh, I talked to that friend of mine when she was down. Oh, I spent that morning that recently pitching in extra on this project where I was needed. Or, oh, I spent this time tutoring. Okay. This life resume, when did I grow When did I experience joy? When did I deal with difficulty? When did I help somebody else? That's actually what we're all going to be doing around here for a long time. That's really, the other resume is good to have, but this is the one. And what this gives, among other things, is the part under your name that's blank isn't filled in. You can't fill it in probably now. You might be able to, but in time you will. From doing those things, some words will appear under your name. It's called purpose. And you'll find purpose, not simply from the intellectual experience of saying, I got to have a purpose, but from learning, from experiencing joy, from dealing with pain, and from helping other people. So that, I think, applies to you all too.
Perfectly.
Yeah. And so on that note, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I'm sure you can all understand now why I felt like from the moment I met him, both learned and experienced joy, because you bring such wonderful...
And John vouched for me. John nominated me to come out, so thank you, John.
Yeah, and I also just want to say, I know you had told me that actually the title of the book emerged from the stories, right? And that was such a beautiful thing. And I think actually you are a perfect validation of the title of our series, because I think how you, with what you've shared with us, it really gets to leadership in public conversation. And that's precisely what we hope to draw out of those people that are kind enough to join us. So thank you for joining us on behalf of the Institute for Educational Initiatives, and of course, Inspired Leadership Initiative, and all of our fellows.
Inspired Leadership is what it's about. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Thank you.